Welcome back to the Vue 3 Beginner tutorial series. In the previous episode, we learned about reactive state in Vue 3 using the ref function. We saw how Vue can automatically update the user interface whenever our data changes. Today, we're going to take that concept one step further by allowing users to trigger those changes through interactions such as button clicks, keyboard input, and form events. By the end of this video, you'll know how to respond to button clicks, call methods from templates, pass arguments to methods, access the event object, handle keyboard events, and use event modifiers. Let's get started. User events occur whenever a user interacts with your application. Every application responds to events. Clicking a button, typing into a field, submitting a form, or pressing a key are all examples of events happening inside the browser. But events are not only about running a function. Every event also has its own behavior controlled by the browser. For example, clicking a button can trigger a click handler, but submitting a form can also cause the browser to reload the page. Events can also travel through the HTML structure, meaning an event that happens on one element can affect its parent elements. In Vue, we can listen to these events using the v-on directive, or more commonly using the AT shorthand syntax. But most developers use the shorthand syntax. The @ symbol is simply a shorter version of v-on. Let's start with the most common event, a button click. When the user clicks the button, Vue executes the handle click function. This is our first interaction between the user and the application. In real applications, we usually want to update data rather than simply logging messages. Let's create a simple counter. Now, every time the button is clicked, the counter increases by 1. Because count is reactive, Vue automatically updates the UI. This is one of the core concepts of Vue development. But for simple operations, we don't always need a separate method. We can write JavaScript expressions directly inside the event handler. This works perfectly for simple logic. However, when the logic becomes more complex, it's better to move it into a dedicated method. Sometimes we want to pass custom values to a method. Here's an example. Depending on which button is clicked, a different name is passed to the function. This makes our event handlers much more flexible. Whenever an event occurs, the browser creates an event object containing information about that event. We can access it like this. It contains useful information such as event type, target element, mouse position, and much more. What if we need both a custom argument and the event object? Vue provides a special variable called $event. With $event, we can access the original browser event while still passing our own custom arguments. This allows us to access both pieces of information. Vue can also respond to keyboard interactions. For example, every time a key is released, the function executes. Keyboard events are commonly used in forms, search bars, and shortcuts. Often we only want to react to a specific key. For example, the Enter key. Now the function runs only when Enter is pressed. This is especially useful when building forms or search inputs where pressing Enter should trigger an action. Vue supports many useful key modifiers, such as key up enter, key up space, key up tab, key up escape, key up delete, and many more. These modifiers make event handling cleaner and easier to read. Vue also provides event modifiers that make it easier to control how events behave. Before we start building examples, let's first understand what event modifiers are and why we need them. In JavaScript, events have different behaviors that happen automatically. For example, clicking a link navigates to another page, submitting a form reloads the page, and events can propagate from child elements to parent elements. Sometimes this default behavior is not what we want. JavaScript provides methods that allow us to control these behaviors. The first one is event.preventDefault. This method prevents the browser's default action for an event. For example, when submitting a form, the browser normally sends the form data and reloads the page. By calling event.preventDefault, we can stop that default behavior and handle the form submission ourselves. The second method is event.doStopPropagation. Events in JavaScript use a mechanism called event bubbling. This means that when an event happens on a child element, it can continue propagating to its parent elements. For example, clicking a button inside a div can trigger both the button's click handler and the div's click handler. By calling event.doStopPropagation, we stop the event from moving any further up the DOM tree. The third concept is the one-time event listener. Sometimes we only want an event handler to execute once. JavaScript allows us to create listeners that automatically remove themselves after the first execution. Now Vue gives us a simpler way to work with these behaviors using event modifiers. Instead of manually writing event methods inside every handler, we can use modifiers directly in our templates. Now we'll look at three commonly used event modifiers: prevent, stop, and once. The prevent modifier is a shorthand for event.preventDefault. The stop modifier is a shorthand for event.stopPropagation. The once modifier is similar to creating an event listener that automatically removes itself after it runs for the first time. This means the event handler will be executed only once. Let's start with the prevent modifier. Now let's create a simple example to understand how the .prevent modifier works. First, I'll create a simple form with an input field and a submit button. Next, I'll create the method that handles the form submission. Finally, we attach the handleSubmit function to submit event. Now let's test the application. When I click the Submit button, take a look at what happens. We can see the message, Form submitted, but it immediately disappears. That's because the page reloads. This happens because submitting a form is the browser's default behavior. When a form is submitted, the browser tries to send the data and refresh the page. In many modern applications, especially with Vue, we don't want the browser to handle the submission automatically. Instead, we want Vue to handle the logic ourselves. To prevent the default browser behavior, I can add the prevent modifier to the submit event. That's it. Let's test it again. Now, when I click the Submit button, we can still see Form Submitted. But this time, the page doesn't reload. The default form submission behavior has been prevented. Behind the scenes, Vue automatically calls event.preventDefault. The event continues normally, but the browser's default action is stopped. In this case, the form is no longer submitted by the browser, and Vue can handle the logic instead. Now let's create a simple example to understand how the stop modifier works. First, I'll create a parent div and attach a click event to it. Next, inside that div, I'll add a button with its own click handler. Let's also create a method for it. To make the parent element easier to see, I'll also add some basic styles. Now let's test the application. When I click the button, take a look at the console. We can see two messages, child clicked and parent clicked. At first glance, this might seem a little strange because I only clicked the button. What's happening is that the click event starts on the button and then bubbles up to its parent element. As a result, both click handlers are executed. In this case, I only want the button's click handler to run. To prevent the event from propagating to parent elements, I can add the stop modifier. That's it. Let's test it again. Now, when I click the button, only one message appears in the console. Child clicked. The parent click handler is no longer executed. Behind the scenes, Vue automatically calls event.stopPropagation. The event stops at the button and doesn't continue bubbling up to the parent element. Now let's create a simple example to understand how the once modifier works. First, I'll create a button and attach a click event to it. Next, I'll create the method that handles the click event. Now let's test the application. I'll click the button multiple times. Take a look at the console. We can see that the event handler fired exactly as many times as I clicked the button. This is the default behavior of click events. But sometimes we only want an event handler to run once. For example, when showing a welcome message, sending analytics data, or performing a one-time action. To make the event run only once, I can add the .once modifier. That's it. Let's test it again. Now, when I click the button for the first time, we can see button clicked. But if I click the button again, nothing happens. The event handler is no longer executed. The click event only runs once. Behind the scenes, Vue automatically creates a one-time event listener using the browser's native behavior. It is similar to using add event listener with the once option set to true. After the first execution, the event listener is automatically removed. So the difference is simple. Without once, the event handler runs every time the event occurs. With once, it runs only the first time. In this episode, we learned how to listen for user events with V on. respond to clicks and keyboard input, pass arguments to methods, access the event object, use key and event modifiers. Event handling is essential because it allows users to interact with our applications and trigger changes to reactive state. In the next episode, we'll learn about computed properties and how to create reactive values that are automatically derived from existing state. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.